It wasn't a virus, and it wasn't a tumor. Something was eating Isabella Sterling alive, and it was waiting in her kitchen. Full story, English version. In the heart of London, behind the ivy-covered walls of Blackwood Manor, Isabella Sterling was fading away. It wasn't illness or misfortune. It was something far more sinister, a calculated, rhythmic erasure of her very soul. As the fog rolled off the Thames, it carried a chilling truth. The monster wasn't under her bed, it was inside her home. Arthur Sterling, a titan of London's financial district, watched helplessly as his sister transformed into a skeletal shadow of herself. The world's top doctors could offer no explanation. To Isabella, trapped in her own mind, every day was a descent into a living nightmare. Desperate, Arthur called upon Dr. Alistair Finch, a reclusive occult detective known for solving the things the police ignore. Finch's methods were unconventional, no incense, no charms, just a terrifying blend of forensic psychology and ancient knowledge. After just an hour in the manor, Finch whispered to Arthur, "This is a slow burn ritual. Someone is feeding her the essence of decay." Their investigation led to Rose, the Sterling family's trusted maid of 12 years. Under Finch's unrelenting gaze, Rose's loyalty crumbled. She confessed that Harris, a local man obsessed with Isabella, had bribed her to lace Isabella's tea with a binding powder. But Harris was merely the puppet. The true puppeteer was Alara, a woman dwelling in a decaying basement near the fog-drenched ruins of an old East London cemetery. A master of the left-hand path, she wove intentions dark enough to rot the soul itself. Arthur and Finch descended into Alara's subterranean lair, a place reeking of damp earth and burnt copper. Amid flickering black candles, Alara chanted over a ritual box containing Isabella's stolen belongings. Fueled by a brother's primal rage, Arthur seized her. "Break the tether," he roared, "or I will bury you beneath this very stone." Terrified, Alara revealed the trigger. Finch incinerated the ritualistic box. As flames consumed its contents, a blood-curdling, non-human shriek echoed through the tunnels. At that precise moment, miles away in Blackwood Manor, Isabella sat upright for the first time in months, her eyes clear, her soul freed from the shadow. Aftermath. Harris was arrested by Scotland Yard. Alara, the witch of the East End, vanished into the London fog before sunrise. Isabella recovered, but Blackwood Manor would never feel like home again. Because in London, everyone knows, once a shadow finds your door, it never truly forgets the way back. Extended horror version. Even after Alara vanished into the London fog, her shadow lingered. Blackwood Manor was never the same. At night, servants reported whispers along the hallways. Soft, insistent, and almost pleading, objects moved on their own. Candles blew out without wind. And sometimes, the faintest silhouette could be seen in the corner of a room, a shapeless form that disappeared the moment you looked directly at it. Isabella tried to reclaim normalcy, but the darkness had left a mark. In mirrors, she sometimes glimpsed movement where there should be none. A fleeting shadow behind her reflection, a whisper brushing past her ear, just soft enough to make her question if it was real. Arthur, haunted by guilt and rage, refused to leave the manor. Night after night, he patrolled its halls, but every step echoed with an unnerving familiarity, as if someone or something knew his every move. Then one evening, a package arrived at the manor. No name, no return address. Inside was a single black feather, slightly warm to the touch, and a note written in spidery, almost alive handwriting. "You stopped the ritual, but you cannot stop what watches." Fear gripped Arthur. He called Finch, who had grown older and more somber over the years. When Finch arrived, he didn't bring books or rituals. He simply stared at the manor, and after a long pause whispered, "Once a shadow walks in, it never truly leaves. It waits, it watches, and sometimes it returns in someone you trust." That night Isabella dreamed again. She was standing in the fog, outside the ruins of the East End cemetery. The earth beneath her feet pulsed like a heartbeat. A shape emerged from the mist, not fully human, not fully something else. Its eyes were voids, its form shimmering like smoke. and in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, it said, "You cannot hide from the debt. It is owed." When Isabella woke, a black circle was etched into her bedroom floor. Not drawn, not painted. It had formed on its own, and far away in the bowels of London, someone or something was smiling. The shadow returns. Months passed. Isabella had recovered physically, but the manor itself seemed alive with something unspoken. The walls whispered. Footsteps echoed where no one walked, and at night, a coldness settled over the rooms, a heaviness that pressed on the chest. One evening, Arthur discovered that Isabella's reflection in the large, ornate mirror no longer matched her movements exactly. It lingered a second too long, staring back with eyes darker than her own. She froze. The reflection smiled. She did not. Terrified, Arthur called Finch again. But the old detective shook his head. "It's not Alara anymore." "She was just the beginning," Finch warned. "The entity is not tied to a place. It's tied to a soul. Once it touches you, it waits, patient and precise." That night, the lights went out across the entire manor. A whisper slithered through the darkness. "The debt, it is unpaid." From the foggy streets outside, a shape emerged, not human, not animal. A shifting, formless presence, pulsating with an otherworldly energy. Its form shimmered and blurred like a shadow soaked in smoke, yet its intent was tangible. It entered the manor silently. Isabella tried to scream, but no sound came. Arthur charged forward, but his own shadow moved against him, holding him in place. Finch arrived just in time, chanting, drawing symbols in the air with trembling precision. But even he admitted, this is beyond ritual. It feeds on fear itself. We can delay it, but we cannot end it, only survive it. All around the manor, reality began to warp. Mirrors reflected the wrong rooms. Doors led to walls. Shadows stretched impossibly long and moved independently. Time itself seemed to bend. And through it all, the whisper never stopped. "You cannot hide. You cannot run. You belong to me." By morning, the entity was gone, but its mark remained. Every mirror bore a faint black circle etched across the glass. Every floorboard creaked with weightless steps. And in Isabella's reflection, a second shadow lingered watching. Always. Arthur left the manor that day, vowing never to return. Isabella stayed behind, trapped in a home that was no longer hers. The fog rolled off the Thames, carrying the whispers of something ancient and patient. Be the fog never lies. Years passed. Blackwood Manor remained uninhabited by outsiders. But Isabella never truly left. She lived there, alone most of the time, feeling eyes on her constantly, sensing a presence behind every door. On nights when the fog rolled off the Thames, it wasn't just fog. It was something alive, crawling through the streets, whispering through the walls, brushing against the very soul of anyone near the manor. One evening, Isabella awoke to the smell of burning incense, though no candle was lit. The mirrors in her room shimmered unnaturally, and across all of them, the black circle had multiplied. Each circle pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. She heard it again, the whisper. "The debt is not forgotten." The voice came from nowhere and everywhere. Her reflection no longer moved at the same time as her. It lagged by seconds, tilting its head, smiling subtly when she did not. Arthur Sterling, now an older man, returned to the manor, desperate to protect his sister. But as he stepped inside, the shadows stretched toward him, coiling along the walls, almost alive. One shadow lifted from the floor, a perfect silhouette of a person but with hollow eyes and a smoke-like texture. It spoke in a voice that was his own, distorted and warped. "You can't save her, you never could." Finch arrived too late. From outside the manor, he could see black shapes slipping across the foggy streets toward the manor, silent as predators. In a desperate act, Arthur tried to burn everything: the furniture, the mirrors, the old floors, but the flames barely touched the shadows. They recoiled briefly, then reformed, taller, sharper, and more alive. Isabella screamed, not with fear, but with understanding. The entity wasn't just haunting the manor. It was tethered to her, to her life force, and perhaps even to her soul. And then it whispered clearly, audibly, "One day you will open the door for me willingly." The manor fell silent. The fog rolled away. Everything seemed normal, but the black circles remained. And Isabella knew, in London, shadows never leave. They wait, patiently, watching, hungry, because some debts can never be repaid because in London. Some shadows do not fade. They wait, they remember, and one day they come back. The eternal shadow years turned into decades. Blackwood Manor became a legend whispered across London, an abandoned mansion shunned by locals, yet never truly empty. Isabella remained, untouched by time, though her eyes held a weight far beyond human understanding. The shadows grew bolder. They no longer waited silently. They prowled, bending light and space, reshaping hallways and stretching ceilings like smoke. Visitors would enter the manor and find rooms that twisted upon themselves, doors leading nowhere, mirrors reflecting events that hadn't yet occurred. At night, Isabella's own reflection began to act independently. It would move before she did, tilt its head mockingly, or linger on corners of the room where no one stood. Sometimes it whispered in her own voice, "You cannot escape me. You invited me long ago." The fog from the Thames thickened into a suffocating shroud, carrying faint laughter and the scent of burnt copper. And in the distance, past the manor gates, something formless, vast, ancient watched and waited. Arthur Sterling, now frail and haunted, returned one final time, desperate to confront the entity for good. But the manor had become a labyrinth, alive and hostile. Shadows rose like walls. Corridors folded onto themselves, and the air thickened with a weight that felt almost sentient. Finch, older and trembling, warned Arthur, "It is no longer Alara. She was a key, not the door. The entity you face is older than London itself. You cannot fight it. You can only endure or surrender." That night, Isabella disappeared. Not through doors, not through windows. The shadows simply claimed her, leaving behind only a black circle etched into the marble floor, a circle that pulsed faintly, as if alive. And yet the manor whispered her name. Visitors claimed to see a tall, featureless figure behind fogged glass. Some swore the figure reached out from the mirrors. Others heard the faintest echo of Isabella's voice calling them in, softly, irresistibly. Arthur never returned. Finch vanished months later, leaving only cryptic notes. Some debts are eternal. Some shadows never forgive. And some doors, once opened, never close. To this day, Blackwood Manor stands looming over London's fog. The city passes it by unaware, but the shadows remember. They wait, patient, hungry, silent, because some debts are meant to last forever. The floodlights exploded one by one, plunging the excavation pit into a suffocating dark. Marcus staggered as gravity twisted sideways. Dust and loose stones lifted from the ground, circling the widening slit like iron filings around a magnet. The shadow beside him expanded. Not wildly, not monstrously, but deliberately. It stretched upward, forming a barrier between Marcus and the vertical tear in reality. From the slit, something began to emerge. Not a shape, not a creature, an absence. A density of nothing so complete that light bent around it, and sound seemed to collapse into it. The air grew thin. Marcus felt his thoughts slow, dragged toward that hollow gravity. The entity spoke beside him, its voice layered and steady. "This is the unbound." The darkness pulsed, and then Marcus heard it, not with his ears but inside his skull. A collective murmur. Ancient, starless. You are surface. We are depth. The ground cracked outward in jagged lines from the carving. The spiral symbols ignited faintly, glowing with the same black circle pattern that once marked Blackwood Manor. Marcus understood with a cold clarity. The shadow that had haunted Isabella was not the enemy. It had been a sentinel. Above ground, London shifted. Bridges groaned softly as if under sudden weight. The Thames receded inches without explanation. Every mirror in the city dimmed, reflecting faint static instead of faces. And deep below, the slit tore wider. A limb formed from absence, not solid, not smoke, but a distortion of reality itself. It pressed against the barrier the shadow held in place. The sentinel trembled. "This force does not seek balance," it said. "It seeks erasure." Marcus felt panic surge. But something else rose with it. Understanding. "You evolved," he said to the shadow. "You learned restraint. You learned choice. That means you're not just instinct anymore." The absence pushed harder. Cracks spread through the excavation walls. "If you were once part of it," Marcus continued, forcing the words through rising pressure, "then you know how it thinks." The shadow flickered. For the first time, it seemed uncertain. "I was fragment," it admitted, "broken from whole. Then maybe the whole can be changed." Above them, fog began pouring down into the pit like a waterfall in reverse. Within it, two faint figures descended. Isabella, Eleanor. They were no longer bound to glass or reflection. They moved like living memory, luminous against the dark. Isabella stepped forward, her eyes no longer infinite but fiercely human. "It doesn't understand will," she said softly. "It only understands hunger." Eleanor reached toward the spiral carving. "Then we teach it something new." The unbound surged violently, and the barrier shattered in a burst of black light. Marcus was thrown backward as the absence expanded, devouring the edges of the pit, swallowing stone as if it were mist. London's skyline flickered above. Buildings shimmered like unstable projections. The Thames froze mid-current. Time hesitated. The sentinel reformed, larger than ever before, not as a shadow now, but as a defined silhouette of lightless form. It stepped between the unbound and the others. "You were whole once," it addressed the rising void. "You were purpose." The absence responded in layered thunder. "Purpose is consumption." "No," Isabella said firmly. "Purpose is choice," Eleanor added. Marcus stood, hard hammering, and stepped beside them. "You fractured once," he shouted into the consuming dark. "You can fracture again." The spiral symbols beneath them began to spin slowly, lifting from stone like luminous ink. They wrapped around the expanding void, not as chains, but as patterns. Balance patterns, choice patterns, consent patterns. The very force that had once evolved the sentinel now pressed against the unbound. For a moment that felt like eternity, nothing moved. Then, the absence faltered. Its edges flickered. Confusion rippled through it. "You divide," it echoed uncertainly. "Yes," the sentinel replied. "We divide." And with a force that rippled through the foundations of London itself, the unbound split, not into destruction, into fragments, each piece smaller, weaker, contained within the spinning spiral of symbols. The excavation pit imploded inward silently, sealing itself with ancient stone. The slit vanished. The spiral carving faded into inert rock. Above ground, the Thames flowed again. Lights stabilized, mirrors cleared, London exhaled. Marcus found himself standing on solid earth where the pit had been. No police tape, no construction equipment. Just an empty lot under pale morning light. Isabella and Eleanor stood before him, already fading like mist in sunrise. "Is it over?" he asked. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Not over. Managed," Isabella corrected. The sentinel stood behind them, no longer towering, but no longer fragile either. Whole in a new way. "You are keeper now," it told Marcus. Keeper of what? Thus rolled. And then they were gone. That night, at exactly 3017 a.m., London's mirrors reflected only what stood before them. But deep beneath the city, far below tunnels and foundations, small fragments of darkness rested inside ancient spirals of stone. Contained, sleeping. And on certain fog-heavy nights, if you stand near the Thames and watch your reflection carefully, you may notice something subtle. Your shadow might straighten slightly. as if standing guard, because London no longer belongs only to light. It belongs to balance. Marcus tried to return to ordinary life. Lectures, books, coffee shops filled with noise and safe, explainable things. But once you are an innkeeper, the city does not let you forget. At 3017 a.m., he no longer needed mirrors. He could feel it. A subtle tightening in the air, a hum beneath the pavement, a pulse beneath the Thames. The fragments of the unbound were not gone, they were dreaming. The first sign came quietly. A child in Camden told her mother that her shadow had blinked wrong. A night guard at the British Museum reported a statue briefly facing the opposite direction. A train operator swore the tunnel ahead stretched longer than physics allowed. Just for a breath. Marcus felt each disturbance like a tug on an invisible thread inside his chest. Not catastrophic, but coordinated. The fragments were not strong alone, but fragments can whisper to one another. One fog-heavy night, Marcus stood at the riverbank again. The Thames reflected the skyline cleanly. Then ripples formed, though no wind touched the surface. Small dark points appeared beneath the water, like ink drops spreading outward. He heard the sentinel's voice, not from outside, but within. They test edges. Marcus closed his eyes. How many fragments? More than before, fewer than whole. That's not comforting. Silence followed. Then, you are not alone. Behind him, footsteps approached. A young woman stood there, early 20s, sharp-eyed, uneasy but resolute. You're Marcus Hale, she said. You wrote about thresholds. He studied her carefully. And you are? Anya Finch. The name settled heavily between them. Eleanor's daughter? Anya nodded. She didn't vanish, not completely. She visits my reflection. Marcus almost smiled. Of course she does. Anya stepped closer to the river. I can feel it too. Something's moving again. Beneath the water, the ink-like shapes pulsed, not rising, gathering. Across London, small black circles began appearing again. Not carved, not burned. Condensation marks on windows, temporary, but increasing. Each circle faintly spinning for a fraction of a second before fading. The fragments were communicating, reassembling not physically, but conceptually, sharing memory, learning. At 3017 a.m., the entire Thames went still. Boats halted mid-current. Reflections froze. And from the center of the river, a column of darkness rose like liquid night. Not vast. Not world-ending. Focused. Intentional. Marcus and Anya stood their ground. The sentinel formed behind them, taller now, defined in layered silhouette. This is convergence, it warned. The column split into dozens of smaller streaks, darting toward the city in all directions. Fragments seeking hosts, seeking fear, seeking belief. Because fragments grow fastest inside doubt. Within minutes, reports flooded social media, mirrors lagging. Streetlights bending toward nothing, shadows stepping half a pace too far. Anya's breathing steadied. It feeds on imbalance, right? Yes, Marcus said. Then we don't panic. Easier said than done. The streaks of darkness began entering buildings, seeping beneath doors, slipping into reflective surfaces. The sentinel moved to intercept, dissolving several fragments on contact. But for every one dissolved, another slipped past. They are adapting, it said. Anya grabbed Marcus's arm. If it evolves by fracture, then we fracture it again. How? By dividing attention. Marcus understood instantly. The original entity gained strength through secrecy and isolation, through singular fear. If fear scattered, if belief fragmented, it weakened. He pulled out his phone, not to call police, to go live. Within minutes, thousands were watching. Marcus spoke calmly into the camera. London is experiencing atmospheric distortion. It's harmless. If your reflection lags, breathe. If your shadow moves oddly, ground yourself. Do not react with fear. Observe it. That's all. Anya began posting instructions across platforms. Do not isolate. Stay in well-lit areas. Laugh if you can. Refuse dread. It sounded ridiculous, but it worked. Across the city, people began mocking their own shadows, filming them, turning the phenomenon into a trend. Memes replaced panic. Curiosity replaced terror. And the fragments faltered. They pulsed uncertainly in windows and puddles. Fear was fuel, and the city was refusing to feed them. The column above the Thames destabilized. The streets reversed course, pulled back toward the river like iron drawn to a magnet. The sentinel expanded, forming a dome of stillness above the water. Anya stepped forward. You don't get to define us, she said firmly to the shrinking dark. You don't get to consume what chooses not to fear. For a long moment, the fragments hovered. Then, one by one, they dissolved into mist, not destroyed, diminished, scattered again. The river flowed normally. The skyline steadied. London exhaled once more. Marcus turned to the sentinel. It won't stop. No, it agreed, nor will balance. Anya looked at the city lights reflecting in the water. So this is it, she asked. We just maintain? Yes, Marcus said quietly. Forever? The sentinel's silhouette softened slightly. As long as London dreams. Later that night, mirrors across the city behaved perfectly. But if you watch very carefully, Ed, you might notice something new. Shadows standing slightly straighter. Reflections blinking with subtle awareness. Not threatening, not hunting, guarding, because the unbound still exists in fragments. But London now understands something it did not before. Darkness grows when feared. Balance grows when chosen.